as you know, we're celebrating Hank turning 39 one more time.
Oh my gosh.
We enjoy it every year. Gets better. So this is called How Well Do You Know Hank? We'll see how well you know Hank. No prizes, just
Will I
see.
recognize myself?
Will you recognize yourself? Okay, number 1. When Hank was growing up, he was called either little H, D, or Junior, because his dad was Henry Dixon Taylor, and he was Henry Dixon Taylor Jr. So all the family had to give him a name that distinguished him from his dad. So how many think he was called little H? How many think he was called D?
D.
How many think he was called Junior?
Which is a trick question because that's too obvious.
Well, those of you who said D
Yep.
were the right ones.
Yes.
Everybody in the
Yes.
Taylor family called him
D.
D.
Yeah, yeah.
And one day, his aunt took him aside and said, "Why did they call you Hank? That's an ugly name." But I think, tell them the story of how you stopped being D and how you became Hank.
When the high school started in the sophomore year, when I was in high school, so you went from junior high in the 9th grade to 10th grade in senior high, and for that 10th year, I decided to switch from BYU High School to Provo High School, and we didn't actually live in the city, so in order to do that, I had to basically falsify my address, and I indicated that I lived with my grandmother on 5th West in Provo.
Wow.
So I had to
The first deception.
establish residence of her house.
Have you
And,
repented of
And
it?
that allowed me to register at Provo High School. So I did my sophomore year at Provo High. And it was a good year. It was a good school. I liked it, had good teachers. And but I had lifelong friends at BY High. And so after 1 year, I went back. But while I was at Provo High School, people started to call me Hank instead of Henry, or they didn't know. My family called me D. And so I said, Hank is fine. So I just answered to that all the way through. And when I went back to BY High, the name sort of traveled with me, and I got back to BY High School. I found out that the year I was gone, that my friends at BY High School had taken tests for me and turned in papers, and I had a complete year of credit. So I have 2 sophomore years in one. Anyway, I got back to BY High School, and they still called me Hank. And it was about that time my aunt was really a little bit put out that I had the name Hank. She thought that was like an old cowboy name or something like that. It wasn't appropriate.
Hank Williams.
I think she thought of Hank Nelson and
Hank Williams was
Hank
big.
Williams.
Yeah, he
And
was.
she just thought that isn't at all fitting.
Hank Snow?
So anyway, I didn't choose. My friends chose, and whatever they called me, I answered to, and that's how I got to be Hank.
How about that?
Wow.
It's lasted very well.
But your birth certificate says Henry, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My teachers called me Henry.
Yeah.
As a rule.
It's been very useful because if I pick up the phone and they say, "Is Henry there?" I know immediately it's a commercial call. If they say, "Is Hank there?" then I know it's a friend. Okay, number 2. Hank was famous for, in Provo, falling through the ice on Utah Lake, rolling rocks down the mountain, setting the hill on fire.
Well, I think all
All of the above.
All
Or
three.
all of the above.
Well, he set the hill on fire.
I don't think he ever fell through the ice, did you? Tell him about setting the hill on fire,
Twice.
because everybody knew about that.
About which?
Setting the hill on fire.
Okay. This is embarrassing.
No, it's a good story.
He lived up on a hill.
I was probably about 8 years old, and my closest brother was Tony, and he is about 4 years old. And it was July, which is really hot and dry in Utah in July. And I had bought a good supply of fireworks. And I saved up my money. I had chores and jobs that I earned money, and I saved my money and bought fireworks with it. And I would sell half the fireworks to my friends and make enough money that I could have the other half to myself and enough money to buy a new set. So anyway, it was, my folks were leaving one evening. They had some kind of an engagement, and we lived up on the hill in the boonies. It was really right on this mountain in Provo. And I asked them if we could use the fireworks that night. And my folks looked at the dry ground around the house and they said, no, can't possibly do that. And so I said, what about if we just used sparklers and stayed on the grass? And they finally, with a lot of persuasion, said that would be okay. And so my brother and I were using our sparklers, and we were doing all the writing your name, and you're doing all the other things that you can do with sparklers. And finally it was not enough, and so we said this would be more exciting if we see how far we could throw them in the air and pretend that they're rockets. And so we did that. One of them landed off the grass into the very dry cheat grass, and the fire really went very quickly. I was barefooted. I was always barefooted when I was young, pretty much, but I ran out into the raw ground and started stomping out the fire with my bare feet, which was okay. But the fire was faster than I was, and it just got away from me, and it began to burn all over, and finally it went about 2/3 of the way up the Y Mountain. It was just all ablaze, and Provo City could see that, and the whole city, it turned out, came up with wet gunny sacks and shovels and helped put the fire out. The fire marshal came also, and he wanted to interview me. But that's the story of how I set the hill on fire. The mountain, really.
Yeah, there's something now. I mean, it was really wonderful because you can now tell about it. It sounds spectacular. You set the hill on fire.
Look at something you
That's, you have something really in common with President Monson,
Yes.
right? He told that story at Wildwood where he and his friends
Yeah.
at about the same age.
And it just gets away from you. I
Gets
understand
away?
the story completely.
The beginnings of your.
His family were like pioneers in Provo because that whole hill that's now full of homes, there was nobody there because there was no electricity, no water, no phones, no roads. I mean, it was just, So Hank's dad and his brother, his uncle, decided they would pioneer that hill. So they went up there and they each built a house. There was just 2 houses up there. So Hank and his little brothers were in one house, and cousins were in the other house, and that was it. So he was a lonely child up on the hill, and there was no one to play with except those 5 cousins. And guess what? Those 5 cousins liked to read books. I heard the story that he actually paid them sometimes to come out of the house and play with him. But the rolling the rocks was also a very famous thing.
Yeah.
He would hike up to the top of Y Mountain and kind of get these big rocks and watch them as they went all the way down. That did not go over too well with the people down
No,
below.
no, no. Well,
Taking
I'm
me
going to go
out.
up here. I think you can see me better up here.
Besides, then you can sit down.
Okay, number 3.
That's good.
Ski gloves. Hank has some ski gloves that belonged to an Olympic star, belonged to World War II paratroopers, or he made them himself.
Made them himself.
How many would vote for belong to an Olympic star? No. You do know him. World War II paratroopers.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
made them himself. Well, I just have to show you these because he just used them to celebrate his birthday.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
He made them.
He did make them.
Look at those.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
These belonged to a World War II paratrooper. This is the trigger finger. So they would get dropped into the mountains in Europe and with their skis, and they'd carry a gun and then ski down the mountain to fight the war. Tell them what it says there.
You can pass it around, but if you look carefully, you can see it says on the glove,
Here, Karen?
Army Air Force.
Wow.
And that was before the
Yeah.
regular Air Force was ever established.
Oh, yeah.
The only Air Force belonged to the Army.
Yeah,
Look
yeah,
at that.
And that's why the paratroopers were
yeah. Wow.
Amazing.
there.
It's beautiful leather.
These
It
are
is
genuine
amazing.
antiques, but he's
Wow.
been using them for the last 50 years.
Every time
Yeah.
you go skiing, right?
They weren't new when I got them. They were in an Army Navy surplus store.
Oh.
Yeah,
So
so
they
they were
had
used.
somehow been issued
Yep.
out and probably used for a
10
year or
years.
two when I got them.
Yep.
My goodness.
But I think I got them for $10 or something like that for a pair,
Goodness.
which
Wow.
is
They're still, do they
pretty
keep you warm?
expensive. But
They're really beautiful.
But
They are
tell them
beautiful.
when you bought them.
when
You bought them, was it high school or college or what?
I was in high school when I
Oh
got
my
them.
goodness.
So he's
Look at
been
that.
using them since high school.
Do you remember what you paid for them?
$10.
Did
That was a lot of
Was it
money
$10?
then.
That was
Oh,
too
back
much
then, that was,
for
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Wow, those are nice.
Yeah.
When he was up on the mountain skiing, it was last week, right?
Oh, yeah, I saw that
And
picture.
he
That a
was
good
famous
picture.
on the whole hill for the gloves and also
Man.
for his ski boots,
Oh.
which turned out to be also antiques.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Anything I bought is antique by
Yeah,
now.
it's just like mine. Yeah.
And for his age, 92, up on the ski slope.
He's 39.
Amazing.
39.
It's just amazing.
Okay, number 4. He served a mission in New Zealand, New England, Canada,
Oh, whoops.
Canada.
Western Canada.
You tipped that off.
Tell him where your mission was. It took him how much of Canada?
My mission was Western Canada. That included all of British Columbia, all of Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
and all of Alberta, and also the Northwest Territory.
That's like half the world.
It is. Yeah.
The mission was
Usually.
so large
Yeah.
that I think I only saw my mission president twice.
Oh, amazing.
We had one zone meeting that I can remember, and then we had when we first came in, we came to the mission home. It was in Edmonton at that time, and so we got to visit with the mission president in Edmonton, and then sometime later in my mission, he came out to a zone conference. And then I got a new mission president, and I saw him a couple of times on Vancouver Island. So that it was really kind of on our own. When it was time to be released, he just called me on the phone and said, "You can go now." So I said, "Okay." Just went and bought a bus ticket and went home.
Hank, do you have a knit sweater from West Canada?
A which?
A knit
Gosh.
sweater, the big sweater with a pheasant on it or something like that?
I do have a heavy sweater,
Yeah.
but it's actually from Iceland.
Oh,
Not from Canada.
Yeah.
How have you managed to keep hold
Okay.
Yes.
for all these years and not lose one? That's,
Yeah, they're really good gloves. I've used them for a long time.
but
He
you,
said when he got home from his mission, nobody even knew he'd been released. He got to the bus station and just took his bags and walked to where his dad was working at Dixon Taylor Russell Furniture Store. Said, "Hello, I'm home."
Well, my dad wasn't there, but my uncle was there, and he loaned me a car. He said, "You can take the car and take your bags home if you want to." So I came to the door, and my brother David was there. He was just a young little guy, and he thought I was the Fuller Brushman. I had a suitcase and had a suit on.
Oh, man.
At one point, there weren't many missionaries then because it was the Korea War, and everyone was getting drafted. So right after he left for the mission, they went through a period where every ward could have one missionary. So missionaries kept leaving to go home, and nobody came to replace them. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Very few new elders.
really shrunk. Okay, he earned money to go to Harvard by, number one, assisting the BYU financial vice president. Number two, welding in a concrete pipe plant. Number three, upholstering furniture. All of the above. When we first got married, he was doing all three of those things. So he is working round the clock.
How do you weld cement pipes?
What?
How do you weld concrete pipes?
Yeah, there used to be a concrete pipe plant in Pleasant Grove. Made those huge, gigantic pipes. Tell them about your job at the concrete pipe plant.
If you see some of these big concrete pipes, they're about this big in diameter,
Yeah.
and they inside each of those concrete pipes, you have to have a steel skeleton in order to make it strong. And our job was making the steel skeletons. And what you do is you have a big drum that would roll around. The drum was about as big as our whole living room from end to end, and about 8 or 10 feet in diameter. What you do is you put reinforcing metal bars all the way around that drum so that there'd be 20 or so bars going the long way. And then they had coiled steel back in the back of the yard, and this drum would roll around and it would pull the cord. It would just keep a continuous spiral around the drum until it was completely done. And our job was to skeeter up and down a little I-beam. It was all greasy, and anyway, you'd go up and down and you'd weld all the joints as fast as you could. And
Without falling.
it was in kind of an open yard, and that it went 24 hours a day, so most of my time was on night shifts, and every bug in Pleasant Grove, I swear, came to the arc light, and they'd go down my neck. I'd have bugs all over, and then I'd come home, and Colette would say all my clothes had holes burned in them from the
In his hair.
sparking. So it made me appreciate that there are lots of kinds of jobs I didn't really want to do for a living.
It was a great encouragement to go on and get an MBA.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, he came home, and not only were his clothes all half burned, but he had big burn patches in his hair. So he said, "This is a good time for me to learn how to cut hair," because couldn't do him any damage. But his schedule was, at that time, this is when we were first married, he'd get up and go to school. He was still in school, so he had classes. Then he would go to the office of the financial vice president who'd invited him to help him work on the finances. And then he would come home for a few minutes and then go off to the concrete pipe plant. Your shift was like midnight to 8 in the morning, something. And so I would make him a box lunch that he would eat at 3 in the morning. And they all teased him because we were newlyweds, so I would make homemade cherry pie. He got a lot of teasing for that.
I have to tell you about the box lunches. I was with the fellow workers, and I would open my lunch pail, and there'd be a beautiful slice of pie.
Yeah.
and it would be nicely wrapped. And sometimes there'd be something in there wrapped up with a ribbon on because we were fairly newly married, and she was giving me nice treats that had to be appropriately wrapped. And the guys who I was working with had been in the workforce longer, and they just rolled their eyes and shook their heads in disbelief. They couldn't believe that such a lunch. We ate our lunches about 3 o'clock in the morning, which is not much fun.
When did you ever see Colette?
I didn't see much of him.
We
It
were
was long
married,
enough
and
to grab the lunch.
I didn't see her for about 3 months.
Crazy.
Okay, where are we? Oh, right down here. He was twice a bishop, or twice in the stake presidency, or twice a mission president.
All three.
Oh,
All three.
Twice a mission twice?
I don't think he was a
No.
mission president.
He was only state president twice,
Yeah.
bishop once.
Not only once a mission president.
Yeah, I misread that.
Okay,
Was he a bishop? Were you a bishop twice?
He was.
Yeah, he was.
Oh,
Stanford
Oh,
ward.
Stanford ward. Okay,
And
forgot
then
about
Palo
that
Alto
one.
Second.
he went right from Stanford ward to our ward.
Yeah.
So it was 5 years Stanford, 5 years our ward, and then 5 years in a mission stake presidency, another 6 years in a stake.
Yeah.
He finally got released, and someone said, "I'll bet you're glad to have him back." And I said, "It's a little late." The kids are now grown up.
On that,
He loved to do building projects. Building projects. A cabin at Sundance,
Yeah.
a moved house in Palo Alto,
Yes.
Yeah.
condos in Provo.
That's true.
Yep, all of them.
All true.
How well do you know Hank?
Yeah.
He's done them all.
Yeah.
Okay. You all know we have a cabin,
Yeah.
so you know that one. Okay, this was one of our great adventures. Do any of you who are here for a while, have been here a while, remember when they made Oregon Avenue an
Yes.
expressway?
Well, I don't remember it, but I've heard about it.
So at all the houses from the freeway all the way up to Stanford had to be removed. So they took that whole swath, and they were all. So they, if you wanted, you could buy one of those houses if you would move it and put it somewhere. So I took Hank to work at HP, and I said, I wonder what they want for one of those houses. So I stopped in on the way home, and I said, that's a kind of a cute little house. How much do you want for that? And they said $7,000, but you have to move it. I said, we'll take it. Called Hank and said, I just bought a house. Come to find out, finding a place to put it was an adventure. And that's another story.
Where did you put it?
Where did you put it?
What?
Where did you put it?
Well, we ended up finding a funny little cul-de-sac off Ross Road called Wintergreen. If you're ever going down Ross Road, you'll see it looks like an alley.
Yeah.
It's called Wintergreen. It just so happened that they had a house that had been destroyed, and we got that lot and put the house there.
Is it still there?
It's still there.
No
Yeah.
way.
We rented it for many years, and then finally said, being a landlord is
Yeah,
not good.
but look, I mean, it's appreciated since
Yeah.
then.
Oh yeah, I think we sold it for $800 more than we paid for it.
Okay.
By the time you get through doing all the foundation and all the things they require, was not a cheap project.
It didn't take very long to learn that I didn't want to be a landlord. It just
Yeah.
things got wrong all the time, and it was just a painful process. And so we decided, and I was a bishop at the time, and our kids were growing up, and I had a hard job at work, and just didn't have time to be a landlord. And so we decided to sell the house. And instead of getting rich as we thought we would, we ended up selling it for almost nothing.
Actually, we bought this lot as a possible place to put the house. And then we looked in this house, this street, we said, let's just build a house for us instead. So that's why we built this house.
You built this?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They had just cut this street through. It used to end, it was kind of a cul-de-sac up to there, and a cul-de-sac up to there, and then they cut it through.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, there were these lots available. So that's why we got this.
So this house and this lot is left over from the moved house.
The what?
Not in vain.
Books that Hank has put together.
Yeah.
10 Steps, Then Breathe.
Yes.
Every Good Thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And The Book of Death.
That I don't know.
I'll bet you don't know about that one.
Don't know that one.
I think most of you have seen this one.
Yes.
Some of you have seen this
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Okay, I'll have to show you The Book of Death.
Okay.
It's not a bestseller.
Might be the title.
This has become quite famous among quite a few people that we know here and in Utah. He has very carefully put this together. It sits on a shelf in his office. When he drops dead, our kids, all they have to do is go to this book, and it has everything in it. So it has a section for the investments, a section will say where all the important papers are that they need to find.
Yeah.
Everything they need to know is very carefully organized. And many people have said, boy, I need one of those. So a lot of people have copied that idea so that the kids, your kids, need to know what's the first thing to do after the passing, and this is it.
Yeah.
The Book of Death.
It was originally titled The Book of Death, and Colette would not let me keep that title. So it's now just the book.
Just the book. Yeah. Here's the one he did about his life,
Yes.
and the one he just finished doing.
Love them both.
Colette,
Okay,
letters.
last one. In the morning, he gets up and does some really good, strenuous exercises, and that's why he's in such good shape.
Yeah.
We have a pull-up bar up in the entry into our bathroom. And how many pull-ups do you think he does every morning?
12.
50.
You know, did you choose 50?
Can you do 12?
It's not up
8.
Does 8?
Does 8 every morning. Yeah.
When we were in the mission field, I used to do 12,
Wow.
and this is when we were in Tennessee together. But as I get older, the numbers have gone down.
Uh-huh.
8.
It's amazing. 8's a lot of pull-ups.
That's a lot of.
Truly amazing.
When we got together with our family recently, most of the grandkids couldn't do that many.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it.
Pull-ups are
Well, that's very hard.
Anyway, we'd like to have a happy birthday cake.
One more
He
question.
does 50 burpees.
We'd like to hear what Hank did at Hewlett Packard.
Oh,
Oh,
Okay.
it's in the book. He's got to have to kind of read
What
out.
did you do at Hewlett Packard?
I did a lot of things, actually. I started out as a cost accountant when I got out of school. That wasn't very glamorous for a Harvard MBA to be a cost accountant, but my boss said, this is good training for you. If you're going to amount to anything in the company, you really need to understand the products. And so if you're a cost accountant, you have to know every part in there, how much it costs, and who makes it. And so I spent about a year, probably a little less than a year doing that. And the boss found out that I was really not a great accountant. My number adding up didn't always total the right total. And so he said, I'm going to put you to work just solving problems around the office. So it just kind of became a systems analyst. And so went through the whole repair operation for Hewlett Packard was adjacent to the place where I worked. And so he said, just want you to go in and streamline that process. It's too cumbersome and it's too slow right now to repair customers' instruments. So I just went through and kind of streamlined everything and speeded it up. And then I did that for quite a while with different projects in different areas of the company. And then went into actually into the engineering department to work on products that were just ready to be released for sale. And in order to do that, you have to do a lot of documentation and have to make sure that all the parts are coming together at the right time. And so I did that as an industrial engineer for a couple of years. And then I went to one of the groups I helped was the purchasing, receiving department and inventory control. And I had worked on their systems for some time to make them better. And the people in the department wanted to hire me to come into the purchasing activity. I said I didn't want to do it. And I thanked them for their confidence and said I'll pass on that. And then the next day or so I got a call from the vice president of manufacturing, and he said, we really would like you to consider carefully working in the purchasing department. I said, oh, that's really nice of you. I appreciate your confidence, but I don't think I want to do that. And then I got a call one day. Well, it turns out the Giants had just come to San Francisco, and we'd gotten an afternoon ticket on a Wednesday afternoon. And so I took off work at noontime. We went up to the game, and it turned out all that afternoon, David Packard was looking for me. And got back, and they said, Packard wonders where you were on Wednesday afternoon. So anyway, I reported into David, and he said, Hank, we really would like you to consider that job in purchasing. I said, I'll tell you why I really don't want to have that job. He said, I just don't agree with the way that the department operates. The people who are in purchasing are having long lunches with vendors, and they come back to work not totally sober, and they take gifts from people who want to sell them stuff. And I said, I really couldn't do that job. And he said, well, actually, young man, that's why we want you there. We want you to straighten it out. I said, well, if you really want me to, I said, a few people are going to have to leave that department, and you understand that? He said, yeah, we understand. We'll support you all the way. So I did that job for a while and fired 22 people. I couldn't sleep at night for knowing that the next day I was going to have to let a guy go. And so 22 people later, the department got straightened out pretty well. We got some good things done, and we stopped taking gifts, and we stopped long lunches, and said if you want to have lunch with a supplier, you can do it, but you're going to do it in the HP cafeteria, and we'll pay for them. Okay? So, anyway, the department changed quite a bit in that period of time. We also did some things that were hard to do, and that was HP by that time had about 10 locations in the world, and all the manufacturing sites used the same parts. And I said it's madness to have each of these 10 locations buying parts. What we should do is pool all the usage together and buy larger quantities. Yep. And so we did that. We worked out a system to have all the usage requirements of all the divisions of Hewlett Packard come together, and then bought the parts in larger quantities, and that made a major saving for the company. Anyway, lots of fun doing that. And then after purchasing, I went to be the financial manager or the controller of one of the divisions in Hewlett Packard. It was located in Mountain View, and so I did that for a couple of years and learned once again that I'm still not an accountant. And after that, I actually left HP for 2 years. Worked for a little startup company called Finnegan Instrument. They made a quadrupole mass spectrometer, which was an interesting product. And It was used mostly by chemists and researchers and government laboratories, police departments, and so forth. And what it did is you could put unknown substances in the mass spectrometer and combine that with a gas chromatograph, and you could tell what the substance was. You could look at a fish liver, for instance, and tell whether the fish was living in a polluted stream, and you could lots of medical uses and lots of law enforcement uses as well. And you could test the blood of racehorses to see whether they'd been doctored or whatever. But it was during a time when the government really shut down all their scientific funding, and so the market for mass spectrometers got to be very, very thin. And I said I had laid off about 25 people in Finnegan Instrument, and that was a huge percent of the people in the company. And I finally got down to the last few, and I said, I'm the one that's got to be laid off next. And so I fired myself, basically, and went back to work for Hewlett Packard. And then did some other stuff. I worked then mainly on major systems. I went back to the repair department that sold parts once again, where I had started many years earlier, and this time basically put their whole inventory system on computers. And computers were just, all through the time I was working with Hewlett Packard, computers were just barely beginning to be used more completely. And so by the time I got back after that journey in Finnegan Instrument, computers were a major tool. And so that's really where I spent the rest of my time at HP. We got so that we could get computers to talk to each other over telephone lines. And that allowed us to set up a kind of a internal company internet system, which didn't exist anywhere else. Then ARPA came along for the military and developed an internet system that served military facilities, and it served research centers in universities, and that's about the only place you found internet in those days. And so when we saw that was beginning to be a useful tool in reaching other locations, we basically built an internal internet system using kind of leapfrogging on the back of the government stuff. But and that's basically where I was when I left HP. So that's what I did. Long story.
Wow.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
changed the world one bit at a time.
Sure did.
Yeah.
You think you're back on, or you did?
Russ is my main helper today.
Yes. Shall I?
Can you bring in a birthday cake with
Yep.
some candles
I'll
lit?
do that. Yep.
I loved hearing that story. I'm really glad you asked, and I bet you filmed it, but I really loved hearing the whole history of that, your career at HP. I've always wondered.
It's all in his book.
It's in his book.
Oh, I haven't, I've read Colette's
Um,
everything thing. That was a dream of a story. I just thoroughly enjoyed that. But we can't find your book. I want to read yours. Daryl hasn't been able to locate
My
it.
inventory system is
Failing an overhaul.
I have the PDF if you want that.
Oh, I'd like a hard copy. I don't want to sit in front of a computer.
It came out while we were in Russia.
Oh,
I think.
do we sing?
It's a great song.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Hank. And we did. Happy birthday to you.
works out better if you sing Henry on that one.
It does. Yes, it does. Yeah, 2 syllables.
Okay.
Oh, nicely done. Very nice.
And this is an all chocolate cake.
Beautiful
We
cake.
have a carrot cake for those who are not chocolate people or like carrot cake.
I should say thank you. Many of you brought cards or little items to look at, and I just made a pile of those, and I'll look at them later, and I'll think of you as I do that. So thank you to the many who did that.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Come on out to the kitchen and we'll dish up cake, whichever kind you like, and ice cream.
Hank, I remember one day we were over here having a meeting, and you were explaining to me that one day we would be able to use the computer to do our ward and church business on email.
That's right.
It was very beginning in the 90s.
That's right. And finally came.
Yeah, what was what happened? I mean, you were doing that at HP too, the email, the intercommunications, right? You were doing a company-wide
I
email.
know, making
Yeah.
airline reservations.
And
you had to do it on the
it
telephone.
served our company internally very well, but
Yeah.
I couldn't reach people outside, so when I was in the state presidency, I
Yeah.
needing to talk to a lot of people in the state.